We would like to thank our sponsor, Island Savings. Island Savings, a division of member-owned cooperative First West Credit Union, provides banking, borrowing, and investment services for residents and businesses across Vancouver Island and the Southern Gulf Islands. Island Savings brings innovative products, an extensive branch network, and local decision-making to the banking experience.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Business Matters presented by Island Savings, division of First West Credit Union, where we delve into the stories and insights of leaders and change makers in our community. I'm your host, Rob Capello, and today we have the pleasure of speaking with Isaac Thomas, who's the Executive Director at Belfry Theatre, a not-for-profit theatre company based in Victoria, BC, known for its contemporary and innovative productions. Isaac, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So Isaac, I was looking at your background, and I want to say fairly new. I'll use that loosely in your role. Is it about a year? Is that fair to say, or just over a year?
Just over a year. I came down here in about June last year.
So I'm curious, looking at your background, what brought you to Victoria? So I believe you're in Toronto previously, if I'm correct. So how did that connection come that brought you over to the island?
Yeah, so I knew the former executive director a bit because he was coming in for big, complicated negotiations with the actors and the Artist Association, and because I was the manager of another small theater in Toronto, then I got to meet him over there, and then when this job came out, then I was actually told about it by numerous different people saying, "This is great for you. You should do this. This is great. You should do this." And I was like, "It's Victoria. It's in BC. It's not Ontario."
Yeah.
And but then I thought about it a little bit, and in terms of the leap that I wanted to make, there'd been options of much larger theaters, and I was really nervous about doing that. So this was a kind of mid-sized theater, and that was easier for me to make that transition from a small theater to a mid-sized theater, rather than make the transition from a small theater to a very large theater, right?
So Isaac, how did it, if you go way back, how did it start? Like, how did you get into this industry? Like, where did the passion for theater come from? Like, how did that all come together?
Because I was terrible at academics, because I hated studying. Well, I mean, to a certain extent, that is true, but it's also because I started as a performer. And so in university, in my undergrad and in my master's in India, I was doing a lot of performing and working with small theater groups over there. And then I actually came across to the States to train in the theater. From there, I worked for 1 year in the States on a student visa. You're allowed to work for 1 year in the field of your study. So I stayed in the States, did 1 year over there, then came across to Canada. But I wasn't in Toronto. I was in a smaller town, Ontario. And there a small brown actors, not particularly in demand, with an accent on top of that. And so I kind of shifted to management from there. So I became a stage manager. Then from a stage manager, I managed the drama school at Young People's Theatre in Toronto. And then I became the manager at Native Earth Performing Arts. And then from there, here.
Interesting. So I'm curious a little bit about the roles of executive director, and you've probably played other roles, it sounds like, in theaters, but the theater itself, Belfry, is a long history in the community. There's an emphasis on sort of contemporary theater and in Canadian plays, new Canadian plays. How do you make those decisions? I'm always curious, like, how do you make the decisions of what the season's going to look like. So how involved are you? Are you the final decision maker? How much do you rely on the team? And curious how that was, you're coming in new into the theater. How do you put your stamp on what you want to see in the theater?
Yeah, that's a great question. So fundamentally, within theaters are usually professional theaters are usually two-headed
Okay.
beasts. So then we have the artistic director and the executive director. So the artistic director is dominantly in charge of the artistic decisions, and then the executive director is dominantly in charge of the organizational decisions. But obviously, in an artistic organization, the art and the organization is inextricably linked.
Right.
So one of the advantages that I have is that I have a massive background in the arts, way too much education and training in the arts, but that also informs my understanding and appreciation of the art.
Right.
And then I tie that into organizational decisions. So Michael Shamata, who's the artistic director, he reads extensively. And so he's reading plays all the time. And then every now and then he'll say, okay, read this play.
Yeah.
What do you think of it? And then we have a discussion about it. How does the play work in terms of, for me now, one of the things that I am thinking about is I'm very aware of Victoria as being in a time of change,
Right.
and of expectations, particularly in the theatre,
Yeah.
of a political shift. And so both of us are very aware of that, and I use that lens to a great extent to be able to examine the plays. I look at what is it, Michael has an excellent sense of the Belfry audience. He's been here for 16 years, 17 years, long time. And he's able to say with great confidence that this is going to work. And I will look at it and say, okay, my particular stance is that, so, and I'll tell him that this is what I think of it. And I'm just speaking as an individual, not as anything else. And this is where I think the strengths lie.
Right. You got to come from different perspectives that way too.
So it's about the box office, and it's about the politics, and it's about the art. It's about everything, because we have to bring it all together and ensure that it is something that the audience will enjoy, and that they will be able to come and see and hopefully learn and grow from it, or just
come back.
Enjoy.
So Isaac, I'm curious, you mentioned sort of the change that you're, in Victoria, the landscape and the, political, whatever it may be, but I'm curious, you've been in the theater industry for a while now. How has arts and theater sector changed for you? Like, what are some of the shifts that you've seen over the last 5 years, 10 years that are, that you're seeing now in your new role in Victoria?
So it'd be a bit circuitous, this answer, but I've spent almost a decade at Native Earth Performing Arts. So Native Earth is the oldest Indigenous professional theatre company in Canada. So as the managing director over there, then, I am advocating for funding, partnerships, for support for the Indigenous arts sector. I have also been on the board of Cahoots Theatre, which is also a small theatre in Toronto, looking to support artists from the edge across race, gender, ability, all the rest of that. So I have been particularly involved, or I feel that I've been particularly involved in these conversations, or at least listening to these conversations. And And I feel that it was only in the last 5 years that there was a big shift that's happened. Within Indigenous arts, the
Right.
Canada Council for the Arts made a massive shift in terms of funding. And they said now Indigenous arts is going to be in its own funding stream. So suddenly there's a lot more money
Okay.
coming in for Indigenous arts and
Right.
Indigenous arts organizations. And that suddenly shifts the whole sector because, well, there's money.
Yeah.
And people are also saying it is now important for us to be talking about Indigenous art, to be doing Indigenous art, to be working with Indigenous arts organizations. So suddenly, within the previous 5 years, so let's say 2017 or so, suddenly at Native Earth, we were very popular.
Right.
And up till now, nobody was really talking to us. And then suddenly, when this change happens, then conversations started happening.
Interesting. So on that, do you, what's the connection to the Indigenous community for you locally? Or I'm curious, like just the piece around community for me, because, you know, as a not-for-profit, you mentioned funding. I suspect that it gets harder to get government funding for all nonprofits. So you have to work with community. So what's your relationship with the community, the business sector, the Indigenous sector in Victoria? How do you work with them?
So with the Indigenous sector, we're still building relationships. We work. We have a cultural advisor within the Songhees Nation who has been with the organization for many years now, but it's an ongoing thing. We can never say that we have, tick this box, we're great. We can't say that.
No.
It's ongoing learning. It's an ongoing education for all of us, for us as a staff, for us as a community, as
Right.
the theater as a community. So we partner with various organizations and individuals to see how we can assist these organizations to be able to create their art.
Yeah.
We're a relatively large institution, so we have infrastructure, we have assets, we have human resources. We can apply some of these resources to be able to support other organizations.
Right.
And that, I think, is something that I profoundly believe in, having been on the other end of the table.
Yeah.
Where I was always looking for support at Native Earth,
Right.
and not having the human resources to be able to do work, and not having the financial resources sometimes to be able to do work.
Right.
But that conversation is shifting. In
Interesting.
terms of businesses, it's a different conversation, because there we're looking at partnerships. So how do businesses want to work with the Belfry to be able to find synergies in terms of our reach? So we reach, with each production, we reach, 7,000 more, 8,000 more people. And relatively, inexpensively, one can, put programs in ads, one can have sponsorships. There are receptions so that, we can have production sponsorships, season sponsorships, all of this. And that is something that I am interested in increasing, because to talk about the funding shift now at the funding level, government funding is looking to support Indigenous, Black, POC organizations and artists. And, organizations like the Belfry have been funded for many, many years very well. So now they're looking at paring down a little bit of that funding to be able to distribute the funds more equitably. We have the structures and the powers and all the rest of that. So how can we connect with businesses to be able to leverage these connections and our structures and our relatively successful systems to be able to get, to look at resources coming in from the other side as well, from the corporate side as well.
Well, I think I'm a sample size of one, but I think like arts is such an important part of what makes a community, right? So I think that what you're talking about, I love the connection between all the groups, because I think that's what makes it, you can bring an audience to a business, they can help for funding you, and then you could, people can have the enjoyment of coming to theater and maybe, like you said, learning something. Some of the, I would assume some of the plays you have educational part to it. Some are for entertainment, but a lot of it have a story behind it, right? So that side of it. So I'm curious, speaking of that, let's talk about what are some of the productions right now? What are people seeing on stage now? What are we going to see on stage over the next few months?
Yeah, so we just had a play by Kat Sandler called Yaga, which I found it hugely entertaining. I know that some patrons found the language a little problematic, but I feel that it was still, enormously entertaining, because it was really talking about looking at female, how the dominant, how dominantly we look at aging female sexuality, how we look at female sexuality in general. And that was part of the reason why the language was so offensive, because you have somebody who's writing this who is enormously frustrated. So the language is going to reflect that frustration. Right now we have Joni Mitchell, the songs of Joni Mitchell, which is hugely popular. That is selling out. That's going gangbusters. As Above is a new Canadian playwright called Christine Quintana, and that is connected to, again, relationships, but tying it in using the metaphor of, Susan Simard's that concept of the World Wood Web. The what? Wood Wide Web. The idea of the mushrooms and the fungal networks, how a forest is connected to its various components, including parent trees connecting and passing on nutrients to younger trees, and using that as a metaphor for what is happening in terms of relationships between a mother and her daughter. Very moving play. And the final one, which I think the business community will love, and they should really be, is about the Lehman Brothers. So it's called the Lehman Trilogy. And the way that is fascinating to me, because it talks about the Lehman Brothers coming in as immigrants.
Right.
And from that time, 3 generations are represented on stage and their communities by 3 performers. So acting-wise and writing-wise, it is brilliant. It is absolutely brilliant. But then it takes us to the moment of the peak of the Lehman the organization itself.
Right.
And I find that beautiful, because I'm an immigrant, right? And as an immigrant, we buy completely into the, well, not completely, to a certain extent, we buy into that whole capitalist thing of, in the West, we can make it. And it is about our drive, our dedication, our business acumen that is going to get us to that. And that's exactly what the Lehman's, what this particular interpretation of the Lehman is about. And I find that really, really beautiful, but just theatrically, so smart, so smart.
Isaac, I'm curious. You made a comment that the language might have been offensive to some people in the play you mentioned at the start. How do you balance, like, because theater is so subjective, right? And like, I might come in, and I think people need to come with an open mind. That's all we said. Like, I love the theater. I like all types, because it's I think you need to expose yourself to that. But how do you balance, like you said, you probably have season ticket people that come all the time. How do you balance that you can't make everybody happy? Like, you know what I mean? Like, how, when someone comes to you and says, well, I didn't like the language, how do you take that, I don't say criticism, comment, and
Yeah.
and move on, right? So
It's criticism, and it's fine. It's fine. I mean, that's why we are here. That's why we do theater. Theater is exactly as you said. Theater is subjective, right? And because all art is subjective, you may like something, I may detest it.
right.
But what is that conversation that you and I have about that art that allows us to come closer together in our understanding of each other, even if we remain at opposite poles in our perspectives? But coming together as an understanding in our understanding is primarily what art,
Is
good art, does. And so one of the things that where Michael and I are trying to write right now is there are about 5 or 7 people who have written to us saying, the language was terrible, the language was terrible. Like, yes, the language offended you. It did not offend a large number of other people who came flocking in to see the play. But yes, it offended you. Now, what else did you see from that? Also recognize that the plays that we do are selected, to your question earlier on, they're selected to give a variety of experiences to a variety of people. It's not just meant for one individual,
right, or one
with
genre.
one taste.
Yeah.
We're looking at different individuals, different tastes, and how can we give them a full experience? And then you come away from seeing a season at the theater and you say, okay, I like that one, I detested that one, and this one was mediocre, but these other two rocked my world.
Yeah.
And I'm beginning to, and the more you see theater, the more you begin to have, a more discerning palette,
Yeah.
mental palette.
Yeah, interesting. So how do you, I mean, your role is so that there's a lot of creativity and thinking, strategic thinking. How do you keep yourself inspired and motivated? Like, where do you find your inspiration from, your motivation from, and staying connected to what what the community is looking for?
Yeah. I think for me, in this role, I find that I have a kind of dual, much more of a dual mindset, in that I'm recognizing that the Belfry has a long history and a very loyal, very supportive community around us. And we want to ensure that that loyal and supportive community remains
Right.
happy and stimulated. Stimulated is important. And yet also we recognize that there is a community who does not come to the Belfry.
Right.
So how can we ensure that everybody feels welcome at the Belfry? And that's a big part of what really drives me, because again, that's my background. My background is, working with communities who have been marginalized. So how can we bring in, um, make space and give voice for communities who traditionally would not necessarily be in this space? And I find that, those two competing, not competing, but those two priorities, and where do they mix and mingle? How do they come together? Where do they diverge? I find that fascinating, because it's a complicated dance. And in all of that, I'm always looking at where are we going to be 10 years from now?
Yeah.
Because the Belfry has existed for so almost 50 years. We're going to exist for another 50 years. How can I ensure that we are being set up for this success 10 years from now? And that's going to take long, slow, hard work, small steps.
Yeah.
We may not see the difference immediately, but I've seen, in the past when I was at Native Earth, I mean, when I joined Native Earth and when I left Native Earth, I could never in a million years have imagined that that's where we would be, from where we began and from where we were
Yeah.
when I joined and where we ended up. And for the people who came before me, they could never have imagined
Right. Where they left.
where Native Earth had ended up.
Yeah.
And so I keep reminding myself of that, I don't necessarily know what 10 years can be, but I can imagine, envision, and build towards that. And very often I'll find that 10 years from now, it would have completely exceeded my
Yeah.
expectations. Hopefully, yeah.
So based on that, I'm curious, like, are there any new projects or initiatives that you can speak about that are going to be happening over the next few years that maybe there's some that you're like, no, can't talk about them. Is there any you can speak about?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so one of the biggest things to talk about accessibility, one of the biggest things that we're doing is financial accessibility. So our subscriptions and all of our tickets are pay what you want. So with subscriptions, you can literally enter any number that you desire, any number that you think justifies the cost of a subscription, and pay that. Our ticketing system is a little it gives us limitations on the other side, but when you buy a single ticket, we give you multiple choices about what price you want to buy. But fundamentally, you can call up the box office and say, I want to pay this much. I value the Belfry Theatre. I value this, coming to see this art in this way, or this is what I can afford. This is what I'm paying. And so it works in Victoria because we have such a loyal audience, so supportive, who come in and ensure that there are individuals who can buy it at a lower price, at a different price. And yet there are people who come in and say, I love what you are doing. I really appreciate what you are attempting to do with this. Here, I'm going to buy the ticket at this level.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic. But in combination with that, because that to me does not exist in isolation, the idea of pay what you want doesn't exist in isolation. That in itself is going to bring people in who have financial accessibility issues. But how do we bring people in who have cultural accessibility issues, who are saying that, yeah, the Belfry is, we don't go into that space. That's weird. And so how do we ensure that people will come into the space and be able to, eventually come and see the shows and, be able to produce their own work? So that's a long, complicated project that we're working on. We have advisors from the community who speak to us and tell us, okay, this is what you need to do. This is where you're messing up. Don't do that. Try and do this. And each one of them is further engaged to be able to say, okay, we're going to, we buy into your vision, and now we are going to, build small subsections of communities and bring them in on a regular basis to the organization. Eventually, they'll produce their own art. Eventually, there'll be celebrations. There will be food. And it's an ambitious
I love it.
expectation, but I mean I completely buy into that because it's
interesting. So Isaac, as we wrap up, I'm curious, is there any final message that you'd like to leave listeners with regarding the Belfry Theatre, or the importance of supporting local arts and theatre. Like I'm a massive believer in arts and theatre. I believe it's really the fabric of what makes a community a community. I think, with everything, sports, you can add them all, and I think all that makes a community. So is there any final message or thought you want to leave people that are listening?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's what I mentioned earlier, that when we engage with art, we learn to be we become a better society. And I find that particularly with theater, I find that the intellectual and emotional engagement that we have with the work allows us to begin to understand, to broaden our understanding of humanity. To me, a really good work of art gives us some insight into an aspect of humanity that we have not necessarily thought about before.
Right.
And ultimately, we're on an island. We're a small town, relatively small town on an island.
Yeah.
We're a community. And how can we come together and grow and understand together? Because Canada is changing. Victoria, Victoria is also going to be changing. I believe that the arts are a way for us to begin to understand how a different demographic, how the demographics of this city are going to be changing, and how we're going to be interacting with each other in all sorts of different ways. We need to be able to understand each other. We need to be able to empathize with each other.
Interesting. Isaac, thank you so much for joining me today. Inspiring discussion. Love what you guys are doing. Thank you for bringing amazing plays to the stages there, because I think that some people don't realize what we have there. Like it really is amazing. So and been a fabric of the community for years. So thank you for you and your team and everything you guys do there. So, and from our listeners, I just encourage people, like you said, like, just go. If you haven't been before, go experience the magic you get of theater, the discussion. You don't have to love it. It's okay. I'm with you. It's okay as long as it can open up discussion. So if you haven't, I encourage everyone at least to go at least once and try it, because I almost guarantee you'll be back again.
Thank you so much, Rob.
Thanks for joining. Until next time, everyone stay inspired and keep supporting the arts, and have a great rest of your day. And thank you for tuning into Business Matters. Thank you, Isaac.
Thank you. See you.
Bye-bye.
We would like to thank our sponsor, Island Savings. Island Savings, a division of member-owned cooperative First West Credit Union, provides banking, borrowing, and investment services for residents and businesses across Vancouver Island and the Southern Gulf Islands. Island Savings brings innovative products, an extensive branch network, and local decision-making to the banking experience.